You're listening to The Streaming Wars, the podcast that discusses all of the latest happenings regarding your favorite streaming services. Find out which service is winning the war this time around.
Hello everyone and welcome to the very first episode of The Streaming Wars. My name is Dustin Fritchell and I'm joined by...
Tony Hammock.
And before we kind of get into... Well, to be honest, this is our first episode, so we're going to kind of explain what this show is going to be about, what you can expect from us, what kind of things we're going to talk about, what kind of things we're going to cover. And in this specific episode, we're also going to give you a little bit of information about us personally so that you have a better idea of who we are and where we're coming from, so that you understand our perspective, or at least part of where our perspective can come from or originate from, based off of our personal experiences and our jobs and things like that. So, to start off, what is the Streaming Wars? The Streaming Wars is basically the idea of all of the current digital media platforms that are streaming online, very much video on demand. These services that are out there, there's a number of different services that already exist as you're listening to this: Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu. There's other services that are coming very soon in the near future. And while I'm not going to try to say that we're the first, because we probably aren't the first ones to do this, Tony and I met working for another website, and we frequently had conversations about content that was on a lot of the streaming services, or the streaming services as they announce things and things like that. And basically, it was basically an idea to turn our discussions into more of an audio form and release as a podcast. So, this is basically going to be a rundown of a lot of the different streaming services that are out there, that are either out there now or will be out there in the very near future. In addition to the fact that there are some smaller services that we will discuss occasionally, but we will be considering them minor services. Now, to be clear, I want to lay out exactly which services we will be covering much more on a more regular basis, and then what services we're considering minor services. The big distinction with these services is that it's whether or not they're available in a larger international market. While we are fully aware that this podcast is probably going to be listened to a lot of people within the United States, it's entirely possible that other people outside of the United States are also going to be listening to this, because they're probably going to be interested in this topic. So, the major services that we are going to cover are going to be Netflix, Amazon Prime, which obviously are already existing as we speak. But then in addition to that, we will be discussing Peacock, which is the service from NBC Universal coming in 2020, HBO Max, Disney Plus, and Apple TV Plus. All of those services will be coming soon. As you're listening to this, some of them very soon, or if you're listening in the future, they've already come, but you have a general idea of what we will be covering. So we'll be covering those services on a very, very regular basis. But then obviously there's a lot of other services out there that are creating content and are very much streaming services. They're just not available in an international market. So some of these services out there that we'll touch on here or there, CBS All Access, DC Universe, specifically Hulu, while it does have a massive subscriber rate, unfortunately it's just not a huge international, and it doesn't have a ton of original content. While now, and we'll get into this a little bit later in a later episode, but while Hulu is owned by Disney now, or majority owned by Disney, the Hulu and Disney has said that they have international plans, they have plans to grow it internationally. At this point in time, it's not. So we're not considering that one a major service at this time. Now, there's other services out there that we're probably going to pop up, cover here or there. There's a lot of niche services. There's different services that are specifically covering, that specifically offer children's content, or there's anime content, or there's a variety of different services out there that cater to a very specific audience. And we'll probably touch on some of those at some point in the near future, or at some point in general. But the idea is that we're mainly going to be covering the major services and discussing the ins and outs of the new content. We'll be discussing what content is currently on a service that could be potentially leaving a service for another service. If you've been keeping up with any of the news related to the streaming services, you're probably aware that there's certain shows that will be leaving Netflix and going to basically migrating over to some of the other services that are coming soon. So we'll be discussing some of that. We'll be discussing some of the business insides and outs of what's going on with some of these companies. If what is happening with the companies is a good thing or a bad thing. So that's basically the gist of what we will be covering here at the Streaming Wars. Obviously, as you're listening to this, news is happening all the time. The question, of course, is how often are we going to be producing episodes? And our goal is to try to get out a couple episodes every month, but really it's going to be dependent on how much content and news comes out to discuss. We personally could probably have all kinds of conversations regarding this stuff all the time, but it's a matter of how often would you guys actually like to hear this stuff. And we have plans, at least for the first couple episodes, as far as how to get started and then to get moving. But specifically, it's a matter of how often do you guys want to hear stuff? The goal is to keep the episodes between 45 minutes to an hour or less. This episode's obviously going to be less just because it's the introduction episode. But the idea is we want you to be able to listen to this podcast and not have to spend hours upon hours listening. Sometimes we might run longer, sometimes we might run shorter. But the idea is we're going to try to stay within that 45-minute range because we know that's a good time period for people to, pop in a podcast while they're driving to work or they're doing they hit the gym or whatever. So the idea is that's the goal. Now, who are we? I've spoke a lot. So, basically we'd like to introduce ourselves to you. And the idea is we want to talk about kind of where we're coming from, our back history, and kind of the services we've dealt with up to this point. And I'm going to let Tony go first because, like I said, I've been talking a lot. So, Tony.
All right. So my day job, I am a software engineer for an AI firm. So this stuff is just fun. Really, I got involved, I think, back with streaming, probably with Hulu when it first kind of came out. I remember that was the only place I could watch Bones for free because for some reason I was into Bones. I mean, it's a great show, but it's Bones. So you had to sit there through all the ads, and then over time, right, it was like you have to go watch one ad to the show, then it became like 4 or 5. So that got annoying. Then really big into Netflix. What really got me very interested, right, into streaming was House of Cards. That was Netflix's first original series. It's pretty much like the first streaming, original content for any streaming service. I mean, Hulu streamed just TV shows, rebroadcast TV shows and whatnot. But yeah, House of Cards was pretty much the first one with high quality. I know Kevin Spacey and all that stuff is not cool, but the show itself, especially the first 2 seasons, were just gold, and that really captivated me into seeing, okay, streaming can be the future. So ever since then, just keeping up with all the different sites. So yeah, Hulu, Netflix, DC Universe for a little bit. Basically binged all of Titans. Currently, I have YouTube TV to watch college and NFL sports games. So yeah, different types of streaming, original content to live TV and a mix in between. So yeah, a lot of my free time is spent reading up on anything that's not technical or computers related or math. Really into technology news, entertainment news, and really have looked into this idea of streaming and how it's going to change our lives and how it has affected our lives. I mean, Netflix and Spotify go hand in hand for most people of video and audio streaming. I think it just came out. There was a report recently that talked about how Spotify is the number one place that people listen to music. Now, that stat, I might have, messed up saying that stat, but essentially Spotify is the number one place to find music or where it's the most monetized instead of iTunes and whatnot. Netflix and Hulu have crazy subscriber numbers in the U.S. Netflix is more prevalent outside the U.S. Yeah, so just the stuff I just focus on and how it's going to change the future. And it's just fun talking about how everything's changing, different mergers that have happened, how Disney buys Fox, what does that mean? Why Disney even bought Lucasfilm and Marvel and Pixar, seeing it from the beginning, licensing and the crazy history behind licensing in traditional TV between new content and how these platforms are going to go about licensing in the future and how some have already planned for the future. Talk about maybe the J.J. Abrams acquisition by Warner Brothers or the Benioff and Weiss acquisition. Netflix's acquisition of Benioff and Weiss from Game of Thrones or Shonda Rhimes from ABC. How they're picking up content creators for their streaming sites and how that's all going to work out. Different properties like Amazon buying the rights for the Lord of the Rings TV show series. Yeah, so that type of stuff is just what gets me interested, and I love talking about that. I love diving into it. So that's kind of where I come from.
Yeah, and I am right there with Tony in the sense of I keep up with a lot of the stuff. Years ago, before I was interested in the streaming services or the services even really existed, one thing that I was always really interested in is the history of companies and mergers and why companies will buy another company. What do they have to gain other than just obviously having a better value for their company, more assets and things like that? What goes into the reasoning behind that? Sometimes it is really just a money-based decision. They're trying to expand, but sometimes there's a completely different reason. Sometimes it's a logistical reason, like for example, there was Kellogg's, for example, bought Keebler because Keebler had a better distribution system than Kellogg's had in place, and they bought Keebler to basically get their logistical system into their own, or to put it into their own distribution system, and in turn they ended up selling Keebler earlier this year, and because they got what they needed from it. But the thing is, I'm really interested in things like that in general. I subscribe to a couple of different channels on YouTube that focus heavily on the history of different companies throughout the last 100+ years. So the thing is, like, that kind of stuff has always really interested me. Then skip forward to the present. So I didn't start off by saying, so currently I'm kind of a master of a bunch of different hats. I run an eBay store where I sell a lot of toys and collectibles. I also am the senior editor over at thebatmanuniverse.net, where we have podcasts there related to Batman, and we report news, and we have reviews and original content. But the main thing that I'm constantly doing is editing articles and things like that. So I consider myself an editor in trade. But the thing that I have 3 children, and because I work from the house, I'm also responsible for watching them. And while most of them are away at school for the majority of the day, I still have to take care of that too. So I juggle a lot of different things, but the thing that I'm always really interested in is what's happening in the world of the media in general. I was a huge movie fan. I still am, but back when DVDs were much more popular than they are now, because a lot of stuff is online, I at one point had a collection of over 1,200 DVDs and TV series and things like that, and it was a little out of control. And then eventually I realized that the DVDs weren't going to be worth anything, so I started switching over to digital, and realized it, there had to be other people out there realizing that digital was the way to go, and that just slowly started converting everything that I had into a digital library online. And that's how I realized that digital really is the wave of the future, and you got to get on the ball now before everything just leaves you behind. So that being said, around the same time, actually years before that, Hulu also was my first introduction to streaming services as well. Just like Tony, I used to watch a couple of different shows that I couldn't watch when they were actually airing because of other conflicts. So I'd watch them on Hulu, and that was probably my first introduction to streaming services as a whole. Later, Netflix actually lured me in, and I say lured because, I'll get into that at some other point. But the idea is that at the time, I actually started with Netflix using the DVD service, and I had that for a really long time. And then there was just like Tony, House of Cards came out, and I hadn't actually heard about the series until after the first season had already aired, and Netflix actually had discs for the season. And I went and I watched the entire season, the first season, using the discs, and then found out that, season 2 is right around the corner. And found out, kind of looked into the streaming side of things and subscribed specifically because House of Cards was season 2 was coming out, and then like 2 weeks later or a month later, the first season of Daredevil was releasing as well. So I figured, well, heck, I'll watch House of Cards, I'll check out Daredevil, and then we'll see where it goes. And I've been a subscriber to Netflix ever since, so that's been quite some time. In addition to that, I've been a member of Amazon Prime way before they even offered Prime Video, just for the sake of getting the shipping. And a lot of people don't even realize, I think a lot of people subscribe to Amazon Prime and don't even know or aren't aware that they have this giant video catalog of things you can watch on there as well. So I've had that for as long as I've known about it. Which was probably around the time that they started, because I remember at one point when I first subscribed to Amazon, the amount that it cost, it went up, and they said, well, it's going up because we have this and we have this and we have this. And one of the things they said was we had Amazon Video or Prime Video. So I've had a subscription to Amazon Prime. I've dealt with a variety of other shows series or services, I should say, over the years as well. I currently subscribe to DC Universe and Boomerang, which is a kind of like a cartoon series for my children. And then obviously a lot of the services that are coming up in the future, I'm planning on subscribing to as well, which we'll get into which ones we'll be subscribing to in the future. But the thing is, ultimately, I enjoy learning more about these companies, learning about the new media. I'm one of those people who, if I go to a movie, I want to see the trailers before the movie. I want to get there ahead of time so I can see the trailers, because I want to be able to see what's coming. I always want to know what's coming. And with the streaming services, you're getting a lot more of what's coming in the future. And that's what really excites me and gets me interested. I love hearing news about the different things that are coming out. Very similar to, let's say, 15 years ago, I would be excited about whatever new shows were coming out on broadcast television. There's just not as many new shows I'm interested that are on broadcast television, mostly because nowadays, like Tony pointed out, a lot of the TV creators that are doing stuff on broadcast television are getting scooped up by some of the streaming services. So that's basically my background, and hopefully you have a better understanding. Obviously, if you have any questions about our background, we'd be happy to answer. You can send us an email at thestreamingwars@gmail.com, and we'll take your questions and respond back to you, or talk about them on a future episode or something like that. But real quick, just to kind of round out this intro episode. So basically, because we're coming in basically 2 months prior to Disney Plus and Apple TV Plus launching there, and then other services are coming very, very near in the future, we kind of wanted to do like a catch up. Where are we at with the current group of streaming services, the major ones, and what is coming? So basically, the goal for the next series of episodes is that each episode going forward, we're going to concentrate on one of the major services, kind of talk about the service as a whole, how long it's been around, when it's coming, if it's not out, kind of how it came to be. For example, Disney Plus has a lot of content that it wasn't originally theirs to begin with. So discussing that kind of stuff. We'll be talking about kind of the values of the companies. We'll be talking about the parent companies that own some of these streaming services. And then in addition to that, we'll also be discussing which services, the ones that are currently out, if there's any shows on the services that we've watched that we really liked, that we would immediately say, yes, definitely check this out. and then anything that we're looking forward to that's coming in the near future with some of the services, some of the stuff that's already been announced that's coming to the services. So that's kind of what you can expect over the next couple episodes. We'll have a total of like 6 episodes, basically each one dedicated to one of the streaming services. And the first one we're going to be focusing on is Netflix, because Netflix is kind of the one that has been around before all of the rest. While variations of different companies have existed, Netflix is the biggest one at this point in time. So we're going to start with Netflix because it's the biggest and it's been around the longest. So we're going to discuss Netflix first. So that's what you can look forward to in the next episode. In addition to that, if after the first 6 episodes release, focusing on each of those, a lot of what we're going to be doing on a normal basis, our normal coverage, is discussing the news related to some of the services. Almost every other week, at least every other week, there's some news about content leaving the services, or content that's going to be moving over to a service, or there's announcements of different projects that are being worked on for some of the upcoming services, trailers released. So all kinds of stuff happens all the time for these services. So we're going to be discussing a lot of that stuff on a normal basis. So hopefully you guys are interested in hearing what we have to say, and you'll give us a listen. So with that being said, I want to encourage everyone, we do have a website, thestreamingwars.io. You can head over to the website and check out all of the episodes, this episode obviously, and then in the future episodes will be also posted up over there. We do have links to our social media accounts, Twitter and Instagram, and we also have a Patreon. So if you are interested in supporting us on Patreon, we do have some rewards. There's a link over on the site for that as well, and you can check that out as well. We greatly appreciate any support that you can give. So with that being said, thank you for joining us for the very first episode of the Streaming Wars. For Tony and myself, we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to the Streaming Wars. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Also consider supporting us on Patreon. Links can be found at thestreamingwars.io.